We're on the top of Daf Ches Amud Beis, and we're discussing the issue of Prisha. Is there a requirement of Hazah for all 7 days? And the Gemara says the following: Ze Prishasa l'Kedusha. And the Gemara is now quoting a brisa that compares and contrasts the Kohen HaSoref with the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur. And the brisa says that the difference is that with regard to the Kohen Gadol, that's called Prishaso l'Kedusha, as opposed to Prishaso l'Tara, and therefore Echav HaKohanim nogim bo. We don't have to be super careful about Tumah. That's not the issue. The requirement of preacher with regard to Kohen Gadol is to put him into the right mood to enter into the Machne Shechina, the Kodesh Kadosh. Should be in a serious mood, a solemn mood. And therefore, the fact that other Kohanim will come in contact with him, that doesn't in any way detract from the mood and the preparation for entering into the Machne Shechina. However, in the case of the Kohen HaSoref Sapara, the entire thrust and requirement of Prisha is based on Tara. And therefore, Ein Echav HaKohanim no gimbo. We're worried about the possibility that one of his colleagues, so to speak, one of the Kohanim, might have contracted Tumah, and then if he comes in contact, that Kohen, with the Kohen Gadol, then the Kohen Gadol with the Kohen HaSoref, then the Kohen HaSoref will become Tameh. Kiman. How does the brisa stem with any of the shittas? O Rabbi Meir, O Rabbi Yossi. But the Rabbi Chanina be'eskan kohanim are ikon nami ha. If we go with Rabbi Chanina be'eskan kohanim, why doesn't the brisa mention that the basic difference between preacher Kohen Gadol, preacher of Kohen HaSoref, is that Kohen HaSoref requires Hazah for all 7 days, whereas the Kohen Gadol doesn't require Hazah for 7 days. So it seems that this brisa cannot be reckoned with Rabbi Chanina be'eskan kohanim. It could fit and reflect either the shita of Rabbi Meir or that of Rabbi Yossi. Both of them agree that the din of the Kohen HaSoref, the din of a Kohen Gadol is identical. And therefore the brisa would not have mentioned the difference of every day Hazah or twice a week Hazah. Maskif lo Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, Ishlaim Rishon. I understand why Rabbi Meir would require Hazah on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th days. Rishon Shema Shlishi, perhaps the first day of his Prisha is actually the 3rd day since he came in contact with a mess and contracted Tumah. Sheni, the 2nd day of his Prisha, Shema Shlishi. Could also possibly be the 3rd day, because it could be that a day before the Prisha, he contracted Tumah, so we count that as 1 day. Then we have the first day of Prisha as the 2nd day, and the 3rd day, which is the 2nd day of Prisha, is the 3rd day since he contracted Tumah. Shlishi Shema Shlishi, maybe he contracted Tumah right before he started his Prisha, and now Shlishi b'Prishaso, it's Shlishi l'Tumaso. Now let's fast forward, leave out Yoma Ravi. Chamishi Shema Shvi, Shishi Shema Shvi, Shvi Shema Shvi. All these 3 days, 5th, 6th, and 7th days of Prisha could all possibly be the 7th day since he contracted Duma. El Ravi Lamali Hazah Klal. Why are you requiring Hazah on Yom Ravi? Lo b'shlishi shel supik, lo b'shvi kol supik. The 4th day of his Prisha could not possibly be day 3, because he was already Porish, so he wasn't Tomei. Nor could it possibly be Yom HaShvi, because let's say he was Mitame 6 days earlier than Wednesday, right? So then the Yom HaShvi would come out 4 days after the 3rd day of Hazah. So there was no 3rd day of Hazah. So it's impossible then that it could be Yom HaShvi. The Gemara says, Uletaimech Now, are you saying that you could understand that he should require Hazah on 7 full days? Ika, is there really Hazah Kol Shiva? It's impossible. V'al Hazah Shvus Ve'nedochas Shabbos. One day out of the 7 days of preacher, by definition, has to be Shabbos, and there's no Hazah on Shabbos because Hazah is a Shvus. It is similar to Makabah Patich, to perfect something, and then it's included in the Shvus of Shabbos. And Eino Dochas HaShabbos. So 1 out of the 7 days certainly doesn't get Hazah. You're going to have to say the 7 means with the exception of Shabbos. Is Hochanami here too? Even the question that you asked me about Yom Revi is Shiva Labarmi Revi. It's 7 days without Revi. Now the Gemara is going to analyze, is there any way of organizing it that the Prisha would turn out to be that Yom Revi, the 4th day of Prisha, is actually Shabbos, so we'll get the full 6 out of 7. Or do we subtract 2 days if Yom Revi is not Shabbos, and therefore we're going to have to exclude Yom Revi and Shabbos? Okay. Now, again, let's just emphasize one point, which I think maybe I failed to emphasize, and that is that with regard to Hazah, Shlishi, and Shvi, there's an absolute critical requirement that there's got to be a 4-day gap, a 4-day distance between the first Hazah and the second Hazah. So when we say Shlishi and Shvi, we don't mean it has to be 3 and 7, but we mean there's got to be at least a minimum of a 4-day gap in order for that to qualify as Shvi. And in the case where if you're talking about Yom Revi, it cannot be the Yom Revi. Well, we pointed out the simple pshat that it can't be Yom Shlishi because he's already been Poresh over the last 4 days. But it can't even be Yom Shvi because if it was Yom Shvi, then we're going to have that 4-day gap between the first Hazah and the second Hazah. Amar Rava, Hilkach, therefore, Kohen Gadol, B'Yom Kippurim, Delo B'Didan Talia Milsa, El B'Kviyah Diarcha Talia Milsa. We cannot decide what day of the month is Yom Kippur. That depends upon the moon. And the Kviyas HaChodesh of Tishrei, and then the 10th of Tishrei is Yom Kippur. Is therefore, B'Tlasa B'Tishrei B'Y Lafruche, it's written in stone that on the 3rd of Tishrei, which is 7 days before Yom Kippur, that's the day on which he begins his preacher. V'chol emes the Misrami Tlasa B'Tishrei, excuse me, Mafrishim. I mean, we have no choice but to be Mafrishim on the 3rd day of Tishrei to guarantee that he has 7 days of preaching before Yom Kippur. So we don't know what day of the week it'll be. That's not in our hands. And therefore, it's very possible that the 4th day of his preacher will not be on Shabbos. There's probably 6 out of 7 chances that'll happen. So there'll be 2 days when we have to omit the Azah. To be the Dan Talia Mil. So we make the decision what day the Kohen should be sorry for Sapara. There's no time set urgency. It's therefore, since B'Didan Talia Mil, Mafrishan B'Revia B'Shabbos. Let's begin his Prisha on a Wednesday. Ki Hechi D'Nisrami Revi Shalo B'Shabbos. So that if on Wednesday he begins his Prisha, then we count Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the 4th day of his preacher will be on Shabbos. And that's the day which Mimonach Shachi doesn't have Azah, either because it's Yom Revi or because it's Shabbos. So this way, instead of cutting down his Azah by 2 days, we can guarantee that max would only have to cut down his Azah by 1 day. The Mishnah says, L'lishkas Farhedrin, that we take the Kohen Gadol from its house for 7 days before Yom Kippur, and we set him up in the Lishkas Farhedrin. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says, Lishkas Farhedrin. You have a mistake about the name over here. It's not called Lishkas Farhedrin. And we'll see in just a moment why that name would not be appropriate for the chamber into which we take the Kohen Gadol for a week. Hello, lishkas bolvate. Now, the difference between bolvate and farhedrin has to do with the sociology back at the time of the Talmud. Balvate or vate, bolavate, are aristocrats. They are members of the nobility. And it would make sense that if we're looking for a name for the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, we should use that name, Balavate. But Farhedrin means the lowest level of officers in the king's court. These were people who were in charge of collecting taxes. They were in charge of measurements and weights and various prices in the shuk. I mean, that's the lower echelon of society. The chamber of the Kohen Gadol should not be called Lishkas Farhedrin. Ella, says the Gemara, Bitchila originally Hayu Koronosa Lishkas Baal Vatoi. And that was an appropriate name for the nobility. That's appropriate for the Kohen Gadol's preaching. But Mitosh and Nosan of Mammon. However, over the course of time, sadly, during Bayis Sheni, the office of the Kohen Gadol was bought by money, with bribes, and therefore the entire respect and the status of the Kohen Gadol went down, 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 and therefore they changed the name and they called it Lichkas Farhedrin, indicating the lower level officer in the king's court. What this means is that they had to do renovations on a regular basis because they wanted to guarantee that they would remodel the lishka every 12 months. Now, there's a deeper meaning here that is alluded to in this sentence of the Brisa, and that is that the Kohanim Gedolim, who were not good people during Bayis Sheni, those who were stukim, would not live out their year. And therefore, there would have to be a replacement minimum once a year, every 12 months. And each Kohen Gadol wanted the covet of having that chamber named after him. So they would constantly have to rebuild the chamber and change its name. Weiter in the Brisa, just like these lower echelon officers in the king's court who were replaced every 12 months. In other words, the contract was only a 12-month contract. Because of this striking similarity of replacing the Kohen Gadol every 12 months, like they replaced the Farhedrin every 12 months, therefore the Lishka appropriately was called Lishkas Farhedrin. Tonight in Hossam, now we're going to learn a little bit about a Mishnah D'mai. Hanachtomim, they were makil for the professional bakers with regard to D'mai. V'lo chivu osam chachamim lahafresh ela shumas meiser v'chala. Now, we know that Peiros Shegadu Beretz Yisrael are called Tevel, and they require a fresh of Truma, of Meiser Rishon, and then from Meiser Rishon, Trumas Meiser has to be removed. That's Truma from the Meiser, which the Levi gives to the Kohen, and Meiser Sheni on the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, and on the third and sixth years of the Shemitah cycle, Meiser on it. Now, after all these hafrashos, we still have to mafresh challah from the dough. So when a person is the balabas over his own field, then all these laws of tevel and all these chiyuvei hafrasha apply. Not only that, if the person is an amoretz, he's not learned, we don't rely on him. We suspect him that he's not being mafresh Mas, and that's called D'mai. If he sells his produce and he's an amoretz and he is ignorant, then we're afraid that maybe he wasn't mafresh Trumas Umaisrus. Therefore, when you purchase Demai, first of all, one thing you don't have to give is Truma Gedol, because that's a very small amount, 1%, 2%, and therefore we could rely that the Amaretz was mafresh Truma Gedola. And he has to be mafresh Meiser because 10%, we don't assume that necessarily this seller, this vendor who is an unlearned person was mafresh Maser. And the halacha in Dmai is that you're mafresh Maser, but you don't have to actually give it to the Levi because that comes under a different halacha called a Mukti Mechaver al Vraya. The Levi would have to prove that in fact that Meiser is Magielo. Same thing is true as far as the Ani is concerned. You have to be mafresh Meiser Ani, but he doesn't have to actually deliver that Meiser into the hands of the Ani. Meiser Sheni, on the other hand, in the case of T'mai, has all the restrictions and the chumras of Meiser Sheni. Same is true for Trumas Maseh and for Chala. However, since this entire entity of Hafrasha and a Chala Shem Tevel with regard to Tfuas Hamaretz is only the Rabbanon, therefore they allowed a special dispensation for those professional bakers who are totally dependent upon their parnos, and we need them also to bake our breads. And therefore, lo chivo som chachamim lahafresh al trumas maser v'chal. Now again, the Mishnah here that we're studying from Masechet Mai only mentions trumas maser and chal, and they have to be separated from the Dmai. And there are really two different reasons going on over here. There's a dispensation, as we said before, for these nachtomim, these professional bakers, with regard to Hafrashas Maser. And again, although the baker himself is a Neman, he's a person that is totally committed to the laws of Hafrasha, but he buys flour that was purchased from an Amoritz. And therefore, Chazal say that when this Nachtum is mafresh from his Dmai, he need not be mafresh Meiser Sheni to bring it up to Yerushalayim. And they gave him this kula, and the reason for that is because in the market we have these farhedrin that we spoke about, and they would jack up the prices. So the bakers were really suffering from these laws of price control, and their profit margins were very severe. And we have to maintain these people and strengthen their situation where they have the burden on their shoulders. So in this case, they waived the requirement of Meiser Sheni. Okay. Now, Chala, on the other hand, has to be separated because the Amoritz did not have to do so early. There was no chiyuv on the Amoritz. So we know that Chala was not taken from the dough. There was no dough. The Torah says, Reishis Ariso Seicha. Fine. And by the way, if you buy flour from a chaver, someone who's reliable, who's neman, who's believed on Mas, you'd still have to eat mafresh challah because the seller certainly could be the tzaddik hador, but he wasn't mafresh challah. It's before the dough was made. So the Gemara says the following: Bishlema truma gedola lo. I can understand why they relieved the baker of being mafresh truma gedola the sanya, because we learned in a brisa. And here we're going to turn to the Tes Amud Aleph. Lefisha sholach b'chol gvula Yisrael v'rocha ein mafrishin el truma gedola bilvad. In other words, even the Amoritz was very makpid as far as truma gedola is concerned. So therefore, when you buy grains from an Amoritz, you can assume certainly it was mafresh truma gedola. Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, nami lo. We're going to alleviate the baker when he buys from the Amoritz the the requirement of Maser and Maser for the Levi and Maser Oni, because the Ani or the Levi has to come, the burden of proof is on him to establish that he did not get the Maser from this Tevel. I mean, the baker has a right to say, well, I assume the Amoritz was who sold me the flour. He was mafresh, Maser Rishon and Maser Oni. Ela Maser Sheni, Nifreshu v'Niskalu v'Elchu b'Yushalayim. But I don't understand. What about the din of Maser Sheni with regard to the bakers? Let them take the Maser Sheni, be mafresh Maser, go up to Yushalayim, and they should be able to be mafresh Maser Sheni from Dmai like anybody else. And what we have to understand here is the Gemara assumes that in the cases of Maser Rishon, Maser Oni, we can ask the baker and demand that he's mafresh. He doesn't have to deliver it over to the Oni or to the Levi, and therefore he doesn't suffer any financial loss. Therefore, logically, the Gemara thinks that Maser Sheni is also not a financial loss, because what does he do with Maser Sheni? He's not going to lose anything by separating Maser Sheni. He's going to take its value and buy food in Yerushalayim, and he'll spend it on his own food. And the Mishnah seems to indicate that the Nachtum does not have to be mafresh Maser Sheni from Dmai. And from the Lashon of the Mishnah that says, Lo chivu osan chacham lahafresh el trumas maser v'chala, the implication is that they're only chayev, these nachtomim, in afroshas trumas maser and chala. They're not chayev in Maser Sheni. And the Gemara is baffled. Why did the chacham alleviate the nachtomim, even if they wanted to be compassionate, from the chayev of Maser Sheni? The nachtom doesn't suffer any financial loss as a result of hafrashas maser. So this is where we're going to stop for today. And tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick it up on the top of Daf Tes Amud Al.